Hello there folks, welcome to another photo critique session. Now my name is Robin Nichols and I'm a teacher, I'm an instructor at Brian Peterson's School of Photography. So welcome. We have 5 new photographers here with 5 interesting, totally different images to review. We're going to kick off with Michelle Rini. This is a picture entitled Heather. I think this is her niece because she writes, "My niece and I did a photo shoot one day. She was game for anything and I had invaluable practice." Now, that's a really good thing to read, Michelle, because so many times in my teaching experience here at BPSOP.com, you get people photographing their family, and the family are incredibly non-committal. They're just not interested in helping. They'll just sit there with a grumpy look on their face. So it's really nice to have somebody who's compliant, I suppose, who will, be patient while you fiddle around with the camera, lens exposure, etc. So that's a good thing. What immediately sticks out, of course, is your shallow depth of field, the use of shallow depth of field, which is an excellent thing, by the way, because it's like the perfect way to isolate a subject from the background. And it kind of means that you can photograph somebody almost on any background at all, on a rubbish dump or something like that, simply because you don't really see the detail in the background. You don't want people to see it, so you purposely make it go out of focus. So that's a good thing. It works very well. I'm thinking you probably shot this, hard to tell, but maybe shot this with a slightly longer telephoto lens. I'm not sure, like a 100mm, 150mm lens, something around that mark, but probably at f2.8. because there's nothing in focus in the background. You've done a little bit of post-processing by the look of it. There's a bit of a vignette happening, I think. Anyway, whatever. It actually works extremely well to highlight, to isolate this woman against this sort of competing background. So she's gorgeous, she's well dressed, well coiffured. The background is just a mess, so there's a nice contrast happening there. What I do have a problem with slightly is the pose, because that to me is just not a normal pose. I don't see many people in my area where I live in Sydney walking around or standing in the shopping centre doing that kind of stuff. So maybe she's goofing around a little bit. It just doesn't quite make sense. If it's if it's an environmental portrait of this woman, I think you could possibly go for eye contact. At the moment, her eyes are looking across the page, as it were, off to the left as we view it. So I suppose it raises the question, what's she looking at? What's happening there? Who's engaging her concentration here? And talking as an ex-wedding photographer, dealing with people's arms, elbows, armpits, and hands is incredibly hard. With boys, the groom and the groomsmen, all that kind of stuff, you can get them to put their hands in their pockets, they can sit on their hands, they can do all sorts of silly things. It's quite easy to deal with. But with the bride, with the females, it is very, very hard because, for example, if anything gets a little bit too close to the lens, like if they reach out with their arm, that is going to appear a little bit bigger than, or out of proportion to the rest of the body. And that's just an optical distortion thing, especially if you're shooting with something like a 28mm lens. It's going to cause visual problems for you. So that's why the flattered perspective given by a short telephoto lens is perfect. That's why, of course, in the old days, portrait photographers certainly relied on things like 100mm or 135mm lenses, because it allowed you to not only shoot from a respectful distance, you're not in somebody's personal space, but it also flattens out the perspective beautifully, and so you don't get that sort of kind of big nose and small ears kind of effect. Okay, so yes, I come back to the arms and the hands, particularly. Hands just look very limp. It's not as if she's holding a hat or holding some kind of prop. It's just like a hand has flopped onto her head. That just doesn't look normal. Even if she looked down towards the ground, I think, down to the bottom right-hand corner of the picture as we see it on the screen here, would possibly be, the best policy here. With women, it's probably a good idea maybe to have one arm behind her back, maybe one arm in front, probably not crossing their arms, but, you can do that for the boys. But for women, it's a little bit trickier. So I think it's a great shot. I think it has a lot of potential, but I just think you need to work that pose a little bit better to create a more natural looking stance. Well done. Okay, so we're going to move on to our second contestant today, and that is, let's have a look, see if I can find out who this is. This is called Broken Pier. Okay, I wonder why. So Broken Pier by Valeriano della Longa. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly there, Valeriano. Fantastic. Now, this is, she writes, what remains of the structure of a broken pier? Aha, okay. A series of poles in the ocean shot at dawn. So, again, there's no metadata, there's no information given to me here about, what camera, etc. That doesn't really matter. It's all about the look of the picture, I think, that's important. Now, the first thing that strikes me is, yes, long exposure. I really like water with a long exposure. So if she's shooting at dawn, that's what you're going to get, unless you've got camera set to 6,400 ISO or something daft like that. So this looks good. It's got that sublime, hard to describe hint of pastel colour coming up in the sky behind that cloud bank in the distance. And it kind of illuminates the ocean in the morning, which is very good. You also get that almost frozen pond look because it's a long exposure. It's a long shutter speed. There are a couple of things you can do here. Number one is something that stands out, I think, pretty quickly. And I'm just going to grab my web page here and have a look at the horizon. You can see here the horizon ain't level. And it's not level. So that's something that sticks out very, very noticeably. Or maybe it's just me, I don't know. But I notice these things and Misha thought, it's wrong. Of course, if you're doing like an action shot and somebody's zipping by in a Zodiac or they're water skiing, that's fine, and then you can get an uneven horizon. That kind of works with the structure of the picture. But because this is more of that calm, still life almost, you're creating a still life with this beautiful light, I think, plus you're also going for this geometric composition. I think it needs to be rotated, I think it's about 1 degree counterclockwise or something like that. Okay, that's a small point. Another thing to think about is if you're going for that sublime, smooth water look, why not stick, and again, I don't know if you've done this, but you can stick a neutral density filter over the front of the lens. This is essentially just a dark filter that stops light getting into the camera. So it's a perverse thing to use because it just creates all these problems like insanely long shutter speeds. But if you've got a good solid tripod and you've got a bit of time on your hands, they're absolutely perfect. Because if you allow the camera to expose for long enough, the water ends up looking like it's a frozen mill pond. And it's a beautiful effect because you can't see that with the naked eye, as it were. When you're standing there, down there, looking, freezing. Probably, I'm kind of a little bit chilly here, and I'm thinking, it's probably a little bit cool at dawn. And you don't see that. So I don't think this is a really long exposure because there's a dinghy in the background that is kind of blurry, it's fuzzy, it's moved a little bit, but there's probably some really cold fishermen sitting in it. If it was a long exposure, the thing would be completely blurred in the background. So I suspect, this is maybe a quarter of a second or something like that. But if you put a neutral density filter, like an ND1000 or something of that nature, this is a very dark one, you'll end up with a 2 or 3 or 5 minute exposure. And that completely changes the look of your pictures. And there are photographers out there whose shortest, whose quickest exposures are about 5 minutes. It's crazy. And so then you can start doing things like street photography, location photography. Everything is about 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 minutes. And what happens there, of course, is if you're in the street, almost nobody turns up because they've walked through your picture during the time that you've taken the exposure or you run the exposure. And so they don't actually register. If you're lucky, they don't register at all. And that goes back to a point, if you look at some of those old daguerreotypes, one of those old early photos from the turn of the previous century, you'll notice that scenes of Paris, scenes of London, these kind of things, these travelogue scenes, have got almost nobody in them because the exposures were 20 minutes. And so people walk in, they walk out, they don't actually register on the film. So coming back to your picture, I think it's great. It's just got that morning calm, I suppose. The lighting is a little bit dead, and that's what happens at dawn. You get this kind of very flat lighting. So I'm wondering, thinking about this structure, if you rotate it a little bit more so that you've got a counterclockwise twist in it to make the horizon level. Maybe it's lacking a strong point of interest. So we've got a dinghy off in the background, but if you had for example, a kid wearing a bright yellow sou'wester or whatever, waterproof jacket in the foreground, sitting on one of those beams fishing or something like that, then it's something definitive to lock your concentration on. It's very easy for me to sit in my office here down in Sydney and go, well, you should have done this and you should have done that. I understand that, but I think the combination of what you've got here is great. I think with the neutral density filters, you can probably push it that much further by smoothing out the water. Anyway, well done, very entertaining, very interesting shot, and I love that sort of ambience that you've collected there. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at a thing called early morning flower. Early morning flower, you'd never know, but it's there in the title, done by photographer Donald Crace. How's it going, Donald? Donald writes he's got a Canon 5D Mark II, 24 to 105, so he's shooting this at 105 mm's. Spot metering, yeah, okay, f19, wow, f19. 1/8 of a second at ISO 1000. Okay, so it's a languid, humid Houston morning. You're a bit of a poet there, I think, Donald. And oleander flowers fall onto the roof of his truck, struck by the contrast between the white flowers and the red roof. So whipped out the camera, took a series of shots. Not until I got home to New Orleans did I see that I committed a rookie mistake. Okay, going from the AC of the B&B to the humid morning. So that happens to all of us, staggering out of bed and thinking, wow, there's a fantastic sunrise. And of course, down south there in the States, you're going to have pretty heavy humidity, I guess. So it fogs up. And this was a genre of photography, I think, in the late, sort of mid to late 70s, I think. And, it was really hot stuff to buy soft focus filters or just breathe all over your lens and then take a snap. So it kind of works. There's probably, I have to say, in this picture, not enough subject and too much environmental colour. So when I looked at it first, I thought, wow, what's, some special effect, maybe some software tweak, not quite sure. So a little bit too much of the red. You wouldn't know it was your truck roof. That's fine. My probably negative comment is I would have picked a better looking flower. And the problem with photography is they record nature as is. That's what it does. You press the shutter, bang, and you've got it. So nature is very fickle. These beautiful oleanders are probably only beautiful for a day, and then they start going brown. Birds flap up through them, insects get on them, and so unless you actually literally grab them as they open and snap them, they're never going to be 100% perfect. And to me, as a photographer, I was thinking, I really want to see these perfect pictures. Look, and that's me just being finicky. Another way to look at it is to photograph flowers that are deteriorating, and so you record the decline, I suppose, of a botanic specimen. But yeah, I'll come back to my comment. I think the thing that you need to play on here is, number one, is probably don't need to shoot at f19, probably shoot at f8. So then what that's going to do is going to make the background go even more out of focus. It's going to highlight the foreground. I think there's too much diffusion here. Okay, Donald, I think just a little bit too much diffusion. So you could have waited a few more seconds as the diffusion begins to wear off a little bit, as the condensation wears off in the camera. Just my thought, anyway. So what is nice is the play of reality and reflection, and that works very well. So you obviously take great pride in your truck because it's dead clean. It's got this nice high sheen on the roof or whatever. So that works very well. And that's something that I would probably play around with. Now you're stuck with a 24 to 105. It's pretty darn good at getting close to your subjects, but it's not a macro lens. So you may find that if you'd shot this with a 100 mm macro, for example, I'm sorry, that means you've got to go down to the store and buy another lens. Maybe you can get a little bit more up close and personal. So I always say to people in my classes here in Sydney, I said, look, if somebody's paying you to photograph their kids, you don't necessarily want to photograph them with their heads very small, their faces very small in the picture, and the entire neighbourhood in the background, because they're not paying you for that. They're paying you to photograph their kids. So you fill the frame. And I think that's what we could say here, is just go in closer, fill the frame. You could even do this by cropping. You're using a 5D Mark II, so you've got pretty big files, and you can do that. So well done. It's kind of it's a bit of a flashback to, as I say, those days in the 70s when everything went a bit soft focus. And I think it works reasonably well, but I think, as I say, there's too much background and there's probably a little bit too much diffusion. All right, moving on, or we're going to move backwards. Now we get to this one. This is entitled There's a Party Going On. Okay, by Sandy Souza. Right, well, Sandy, I don't know what kind of parties you go to, but this looks very interesting. It's actually, I'm just teasing you, this is actually stunning. So you write, one of several shots taken while watching spray bounce off rocks in a stream above falls. Sounds like you're hanging from a wire or something, watching this. Anyway, when you spotted it, you immediately saw a dance floor in the spray with dancers having a fine old time. So I often shoot this way, letting my lens search for a photo. I may first think not much here to shoot, and then you drift your lens, and then you say my eye will finally see, and click, 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 I'll shoot for hours. That's good. So clearly a passion, clearly an obsession maybe. It's very good to be obsessed as long as it's about the right things. And photography is a very fine example. I actually love this picture. Initially, it's kind of like, oh yeah, this is kind of like a, one of those ubiquitous drops of water with the perfect splash photos gone horribly wrong because she's put in too much water. But I think no, I think it's just a maelstrom of energy. A couple of the other photos we've looked at today, I think I've sort of verged towards saying, look, I think it's a good picture, but we need like a little bit more of a center of focus or a center of interest or point of interest. And here we have it. I can actually exactly see what Sandy's talking about in terms of hands raised to the beat. You can actually see some faces in these little water drops. So that's quite amazing. It's a very energetic image because it's got all this blurred action in the bottom, which I love, this kind of brown stained color in the bottom, and then the clear, I don't know, almost pure water look of the tops of the drops. The tops of the drops, you get what I mean. It's actually a really interesting picture. And who'd have thought this is just, as you say, water spewing over a waterfall or hammering onto the ground and bouncing. So Sandy, I think well done. I really like this picture. How would you improve it? I don't know. I think one of the problems with this kind of photography, and again it's rather like the slow shutter photography we talked about with the peer shot, is you don't see this with the naked eye. It's a complete accident if you get a hot shot because you cannot physically see it and photograph it at the same time. So you probably have to sit there going bang, 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 just keep your finger down in the hope that one of those shots is going to be pretty racy. And then you can start again, you can change the aperture, you can change the shutter speed to get different effects. The nice thing about this, of course, is, if it's raining or if the waterfall, it's going to keep on falling, so you've got plenty of time to experiment. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. Maybe you could get more impressive results, I don't know. One thing that I could offer is you can use the flash. And you don't say here what camera you have, but if you have even the little pop-up flash, you can use. And what that does is add some highlights, and there's going to be plenty of highlights in here because it's all water, so it's going to be very highly reflective. So you'll end up with some quite interesting results because it just picks out some of the highlights. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a very good thing to do. Just pop in a little bit of flash. I know it's a daylight shot, but that's going to work to highlight and put maybe a little bit more sparkle into the shot. But otherwise I think it's tremendous. And actually looking at it now, I look at this amazing raging storm on the right hand side. I think that's just divine. It's just a really nice thing. So it sounds unfair to me to say this is a happy accident for my comments that it's very hard to actually press the shutter at the right time. But I think the whole point is you were there and you were thinking about it and you were shooting it and you got it. So well done. Okay, and we now come to a photograph by somebody called Rick Federico. I'm guessing Rick because your name's on the picture. And this is entitled Into the Great Wide Open. Now, I have to say, I looked at this originally in the small view that we get initially as instructors. We see this little view here. And I thought, oh, wow, this looks like René Magritte. I don't know if you're familiar with Magritte's typical surrealist paintings of man wearing bowler hat floating in space with an umbrella, this kind of thing. So it looked to me like, I thought, oh, here's Rick. He's been a little bit clever with Photoshop and he's sandwiched some kind of geometrical structure with a different background that he shot somewhere else. And then I blew it up and looked at it. I thought, no, it's just a straight shot. And it looks fantastic. So it's a good thing because it got my mind buzzing. I'm thinking, oh, how's he done this? What's happening here? Am I looking up? Am I looking down? Am I looking horizontally? And has he put a cloudscape in the background as if it was painted on a wall? Or am I looking directly up into space? So that's good. So Ricardo writes, captured the image with a 5D Mark II, Canon 70-300, shooting at 70 mm at f8, 5,000th of a second, so taking no chances there with the shutter speed, ISO 400. So he's, as we now know, as we've probably all worked out, this is just looking up through a protective cage, up a staircase going up a building, so he's just shooting straight up. Late morning, in spring, partly cloudy sky, intermittently quite bright, hand holding the camera looking straight up. So it's one of the more awkward and physically demanding shots he's taken. While the sense of dropping off into the sky is one of the things that appeals to me most in the image, I'm curious to hear other input. Does it work for the viewer, and why or why not? Well, it works for me for those reasons I've just stated, because you're messing with our heads here, Rick. You're messing with my head, and that's simply because you're not quite sure whether this is, and I suppose that's a sign of the times, isn't it? Whether this is like a surrealist Magritte style composite, so it's been made up of a number of different elements being brought together, or whether we're looking directly up, or and that's really good. If you can engage the viewer's brain, so much the better, because if you just look at it and it washes over you like mouthwash or something, you think, well, the photo is a failure. And that's how I judge many images. If you get, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. Oh, what's happening here? Where were they? Even if it's just like, oh, that's a beautiful place, I'd love to get on a plane and go there. That's a good sales pitch. So any kind of engagement with the viewer is important. I think you've got it in spades here. I suppose, on a different day you could get more interesting clouds. You could have thunderheads, storm clouds, rain, sleet, snow, all kind of things. But this does work pretty well. Another way to look at it, possibly if you've got a brilliant sunset, so you can pump in a little bit more colour there, Rick. But it's engaged me. I'm fully engaged. I think the depth of field works beautifully. I think a shot like this needs to be pin sharp all the way up. And I'm surprised it's done this. This is f8 using a 300mm telephoto lens, which is not particularly particularly good lens to use for a lot of depth of field close to the camera. So you're shooting at I think you're right, 70mm. So at the wide angle end of the lens, it's like a short telephoto actually. But I think that's a very effective image. So well done. It's got me engaged, and I can kind of understand your comments about being it's a physically challenging one, because look, most of us stand and shoot from 5 feet. We just shoot straight ahead, slightly down, slightly up. That's it. And you're kind of bent over double, your neck at 90 degrees, leaning backwards, shooting up this safety chute. And it is structurally kind of hard to do from a physical point of view. What I think is also good is the composition. And I don't know whether you've done any post-processing cropping here. I'd be surprised if you haven't. And if you haven't, I'll take my hat off as well, because it is so symmetrical. It's not funny. That is very, very good. So that's what also helps. If this was kind of off-center, wasn't quite symmetrical, it wouldn't work so well. So there's a precision in the composition as well as that whole kind of confusion about which way up we're looking. Well done.